He gave me a fountain pen 2 weeks before our wedding. Silver, brushed, not polished. My name engraved down the barrel in a serif so fine you had to tilt it toward the lamp to read it. He put it in my hand and said,
For signing the most important thing you'll ever sign.
I want you to remember that he said that, because he was right, and he had no idea how right he was. 11 days later, I signed everything he asked me to sign, every page, with his pen. And 3 days before the wedding, he was the one who called it off. To this day, and it has been 4 years, I don't believe he understands why. Stay with me, because the answer is on page 3, and nobody in that family ever bothered to read it. Before I take you back, if stories like this one are the kind you come here for, I'd love for you to stay a while with us at Vellum of Life. Subscribe and turn on the bell, and you'll find a new story here every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And if you've lived through something you've never quite said out loud, something quiet, something that turned, I would truly like to hear it. You can leave it in the comments or write to me privately at vellumoflife@gmail.com. Your privacy is protected completely. Names, cities, every identifying detail can be changed. Nobody will ever find you in a story told here. Every story deserves dignity. That's the whole reason this channel exists. Now, Charleston. I have painted plants for 22 years. Not flowers, exactly. People hear botanical illustrator and they picture greeting cards. What I do is closer to a deposition. A photograph shows you one specimen on one afternoon in one light. An illustration shows you the truth of the thing. The bud and the open bloom and the cross-section and the seed, all on one sheet, all correct, all measured. My studio is the second floor of a narrow house on Bogard Street, and the whole room smells like wet cotton rag and gum arabic. There's a north window, because north light doesn't lie to you. There's a drafting table my father built badly in 1979, and I have never replaced. There's a dissecting scope, a jar of sable brushes worn down to almost nothing, and a flat file with 9 drawers. The flat file is the reason for this story. 940 plates. That is what was in those drawers. Every one of them dated, numbered, and annotated with collection data in my own hand. Where the specimen came from, who collected it, what day, what soil, what conditions. 22 years of mornings. Most of it was work I'd done for an heirloom seed institute up the coast. Old varieties. Beans nobody grows anymore. A field pea that came over on a ship in 1748 and survived because one family kept planting it for 270 years without ever writing down why. I made $42 an hour doing this, in case you're wondering what it was worth. I met Grant Whitlock at a fundraiser I did not want to attend. I want to be honest about something, because I think it matters. I was 44 years old, and I had been alone for a very long time. Not unhappily, but long enough that I'd stopped narrating my day to anyone. Long enough that I'd developed the habit of talking to the plants on the table, quietly, the way you talk to a cat. He was standing in front of a framed plate of mine that the Institute had hung near the bar. He was reading the label. And then he did the thing. He turned to me. He didn't know it was mine yet, and he said,
Why is the seed drawn twice?
22 years. Do you know how many people have asked me a real question about my work in 22 years? Not, oh, how lovely. Not, you're so talented, I can't even draw a stick figure. A question with an answer. I told him, because one is the seed as it sits in the pod, and one is the seed as it falls, and the falling shape is how you tell it from its cousin. He listened to the entire answer. I found out later that a man can be taught to ask that question. But I didn't know that yet.
That night, I just went home and stood in my own kitchen with my coat still on, feeling something I'd have been embarrassed to name. I'm not going to pretend those 18 months were bad. It would be easier for me if they had been. He came to the studio on Sundays and read while I worked. He learned to be quiet in this specific way you have to be quiet around someone doing detail work. No talking during a stipple pass, no walking behind the chair. He never once suggested I paint something more commercial. He asked about the flat file often. I remember being delighted that he asked about it. I would pull a drawer out and hand him a plate and tell him the whole provenance of it, the date, the collector, the county, and he would hold it by the edges the way I'd shown him and say,
And this is the only one? Anywhere?
and I'd say yes, because it was. His family had money, Whitlock money, 4 generations of it, the kind that doesn't appear on any building, but appears on every board. His mother was pleasant to me in a way that never quite reached the eyes, and I told myself that was just how those women were. He proposed in March, in the studio, at 4 in the afternoon, with the north light on the floor. I said yes before he finished the sentence. I want you to know that I was happy. I need you to know that, because of what I'm about to tell you, and because I think there's something worse than being deceived, and it's being told afterward that you should have known. I didn't know. But I read carefully. It's my entire profession, and that turned out to be enough.
The wedding was set for Saturday, the 18th of October. Small, 60 people, a garden on Rutledge Avenue, a string trio because Grant's mother insisted.
On Wednesday the 1st, he took me to dinner and gave me the pen. He'd had it made, brushed silver, my name down the barrel, and a nib he'd had ground fine because he knew I'd hate a broad one. He watched my face while I turned it over, and there was nothing false in his expression. I've replayed that moment more times than I'd like to admit, looking for the seam, and I have never found it. Then, over coffee, he slid a folder across the table.
It's the prenup. It's routine. My mother's lawyers do this for everybody who marries in. It's really about protecting you from us, honestly. You don't want to be attached to a Whitlock LLC if something goes sideways.
He laughed a little when he said it. Self-deprecating. Perfect.
Take your time with it. Or don't. It's 12 pages of nothing.
12 pages of nothing. I took it home, and because I am who I am, I did not read it that night. I put it on the drafting table, and I finished the plate I was working on first, because the wash was wet, and a wash doesn't wait. Then I sat down with a cup of tea and a pencil, the way I read anything. Pages 1 and 2 were exactly what he said. Separate property stays separate. His stays his, mine stays mine. Standard, tidy, almost boring. Page 3 was where the sentence was. I'm going to give it to you close to how it read, because the wording is the whole story. All intellectual property, original works of authorship, archival collections, and reproduction rights owned or controlled by the party of the second part, as of the date of marriage, shall be assigned to and administered by Whitlock Legacy Holdings, LLC. I read it 4 times. Then I put the pencil down and sat very still in a room I had sat in for 22 years. Because here is what that sentence was not. It was not about money. There was no clause about my accounts, my house, my retirement. There was almost nothing about money at all, and what there was generous. It was about the drawers. 940 plates, dated, sourced, signed, every one of them the only copy anywhere. And a man does not put an archival collections clause in a routine prenuptial agreement by accident. Somebody typed that. Somebody knew that the word archival needed to be in there. I sat in that chair until the tea went cold, and I did the thing I have been trained for 2 decades to do.
I stopped feeling, and I started observing.
Grant kept an office on Broad Street. I had a key, and I'd been in it 100 times.
I told him I was coming by to pick up the original of the agreement, that I wanted to mark up a clean copy, and I'd rather have the executed version. Which was true. It was even reasonable. He said,
Sure, it's in the left drawer.
and went back to whatever he was doing. The folder was in the left drawer. And in the same drawer, underneath it, was a second folder that had a name on the tab.
Vein, Cultivar Priority, Marsh Collection.
My name, my last name, on a file tab, in a hand that wasn't mine. I want to be precise about what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't rage. It was the feeling you get when you look through a lens and the focus finally lands. That small physical click behind the eyes when a blurred thing becomes an edge.
I sat down on the floor of his office with the folder in my lap.
Priscilla Vane was a consultant, agricultural intellectual property. Her firm worked for the people who file patents on plant varieties, and more to the point, for the people who fight those patents. Here is the thing about a patent on a living thing. The whole fight is about priority. Who had it first? And you don't prove priority with a photograph or a memory or a farmer's story. You prove it with a dated, documented, provenanced record of the plant as it existed on a specific day. A dated, documented, provenanced record. 940 of them in a flat file on Bogart Street. There were 11 months of correspondence in that folder. There were valuations, actual dollar figures attached to the collection, in ranges I had to read twice, because I'd never once thought of the drawers as having a price. There was a licensing structure. There was a memo about anticipated custodial transfer with a projected date. The projected date was the 18th of October. And there was a message from Vane to Grant, 11 months old, dated the week before that fundraiser, that said, "She'll be at the Seed Institute thing on the 14th. She's the one standing next to the framed plate. Ask her something specific. She'll talk." Ask her something specific. She'll talk. I put the folder back exactly as I found it. I straightened the corner so it sat square. I took the agreement and I locked the office and I drove home over the Ashley River with the windows down because I couldn't get enough air. And somewhere on that bridge, I stopped crying and started thinking. That is the moment this story turns. Not because anything happened to me, because I decided something. I want to tell you what I did not do because it took more out of me than what I did. I did not call him. I did not drive to his house. I did not put the folder on a table and watch his face. And I had earned that, I want to be clear. I had earned the right to watch his face. I did not tell a single friend. I did not write anything down where it could be found. I did not post one word. Because the moment he knew that I knew, I had 17 days of leverage and then nothing. And I had spent 22 years learning that the difference between a good record and a useless one is whether you did it in the right order. On Sunday morning, I called him, and I kept my voice completely level. I want 48 hours. I want my lawyer to read it before I sign. There was a pause on the line. Short, but I'd been listening to that man for 18 months, and I heard it.
It's routine.
I know, and if it were my document and you were signing it, you would want your mother's lawyer to read it, wouldn't you? Another pause.
Of course. Take the time, take longer if you want.
He couldn't say no. That's the whole thing. A man asking you to sign something without reading it cannot object when you say you'd like to read it. not without becoming, in that instant, exactly what he spent 11 months not being. 48 hours. That's what I asked for. Remember that number. It matters later, and not for the reason you think. Colleen Ashby had done my mother's estate. She was 63, she took notes on legal pads with a pencil, and she did not once in the entire conversation tell me she was sorry. I put the agreement in front of her, and I said, "Page 3. She read it. She read it again. Then she took her glasses off and said,
Who else knows that you know?
"Nobody."
Good. Keep it that way.
Then she asked me a question that reorganized everything.
Adele, as of today, who owns those plates?
I do.
All of them? The Institute commissioned some of that work.
They commissioned the work. The originals came back to me. It's in every contract I ever signed with them, going back to 2003. They didn't want the storage. Colleen tapped her pencil once on the pad.
Then the clause only bites on what you own on the 18th. It's not a net, it's a photograph. It captures whatever is in your hands at one specific moment on one specific day.
So if my hands are empty,
Then it captures nothing, and it is not fraud, and it is not concealment, and it is not a breach of anything, because you haven't signed it yet, and because you are permitted to do whatever you like with your own property up until the second you do.
she put her glasses back on.
You have 11 days. What do you want to do with them?
I called Dot Ferris that night. Dot had been the archivist at the Seed Institute since before I was hired. 71 years old, 5'0", reading glasses on a beaded chain, and the only person alive who understood exactly what was in those 9 drawers, because she'd cataloged half of it herself. I didn't tell her about Grant. I told her one sentence. I said, "Dot, I need to give the collection to the Institute, and I need it done before the 18th. And Dot, bless that woman for the rest of her life, did not ask me a single question. She said,
How early can you be here Tuesday?
"That's it. That's the whole conversation." I think there's a kind of friendship that only exists between women who have both been underestimated professionally for 40 years. It doesn't require an explanation. It just requires a time. Tuesday, the 7th of October. I got to the Institute at 6:40 in the morning, with the flat file emptied into 9 archival boxes in the back of my car. We did it in the reading room, on the long oak table, with the blinds up. First, the registration. Every plate photographed at 400 dots per inch, the whole collection filed with the Copyright Office as a single unpublished group. The effective date of a registration is the day the complete submission is received, not the day it's approved, the day it lands. It landed at 9:14 in the morning. I have the confirmation. I still have it. Then the deed of gift. Colleen had drafted it over the weekend. Ownership of the physical collection and assignment of the reproduction rights transferred outright and irrevocably to the Institute, effective on execution, with one clause reserved for me: lifetime custodial access. I could work with them, borrow from them, add to them, be buried in the reading room if I wanted. I just wouldn't own them. And then Dot and I stamped 940 sheets. Accession number. Date. Institute mark. Bottom right corner. On the mount. Never on the plate. It took 6 hours and 11 minutes. We did not talk. Not because it was tense, because there was nothing to say, and the stamping had a rhythm to it, and after a while, the rhythm was the only thing in the room. Ink pad, press, lift, next. 2 women at a table, 171 and 146, with the October light moving slowly across the oak. At one point, Dot stopped, halfway through the third box, and looked at a plate for a long moment. It was the field pea, the one from 1748.
You were 24 when you did this one.
25. She nodded and stamped it and put it in the pile.
That is the most important thing I have ever done in my life, and no one watched it happen, and it made no sound at all.
The notary came at 4. I signed the deed of gift with the pen Grant gave me. It seemed correct. On Wednesday, the 8th, I met Grant for lunch, and I signed the prenuptial agreement. All 12 pages, every initial box, every schedule. I did not negotiate one word of it, and I did not ask for one change. And when he said,
Did your lawyer have any issues?
"She said it was clean."
Which was true. It was a beautifully drafted document. It did exactly what it was written to do.
It assigned to Whitlock Legacy Holdings all intellectual property, original works of authorship, archival collections, and reproduction rights owned or controlled by me as of the date of marriage. As of the date of marriage, I owned a drafting table, a dissecting scope, a jar of ruined brushes, and an empty flat file.
He was so relieved. That's what I remember most clearly. He put his hand over mine on the table, and he exhaled, and he said,
Thank you. I know it's unromantic.
And I said, "It's fine. It's paperwork." For 10 days, I planned a wedding. I went to the fitting, I approved a menu, I sat with his mother and discussed whether the trio should play during the seating. I have thought a great deal about whether that makes me cruel.
I've decided it doesn't, because I never lied to him, not once in 10 days. I simply answered the questions he asked me, and he never once asked me the only question that mattered.
Their diligence found it on Wednesday the 15th. It wasn't hidden, that's the part I think about. A copyright registration is a public record. A recorded deed of gift is a public record. It was all sitting in the open, in the ordinary places where a lawyer looks, and it took them 8 days to look. He called me at 7:40 in the evening. I was at the studio. The north window was dark, and the lamp was on, and I was working on a seed pod I never did finish. I let it ring twice, and then I picked it up. He didn't say hello. He said,
When did you do it?
and I said Tuesday the 7th. There was a silence on that line that went on long enough that I could hear a television somewhere behind him. Then he said,
Adele.
and he stopped. He started again 3 times. I could hear him assembling and discarding sentences, and I understood that he was not searching for an apology. He was searching for the version of this that let him keep going. He never found one. Finally, he said, in a voice that had gone thin.
Why didn't you say anything?
I looked at the pen on the table. And I said, I read all 12 pages. Take care, Grant. And I hung up the phone. Nobody screamed. Nobody was exposed. There was no confrontation. And there was no room full of people. And there was no moment where anyone got to see anyone's face fall. He called off the wedding the next morning, through his mother, in a 2-line email to 60 guests, citing unresolved differences. He called it off, not me. I want you to sit with that, because I've had 4 years to, and it still does something to me. I never had to end it. I never had to defend myself or prove anything, or say the words "you used me" out loud to a man who would only have denied them. I never had to become someone I'd have to recover from. They walked away from me because there was nothing left to take. That is what the reversal was.
Not a victory, a subtraction. I simply removed the reason, and the whole thing dissolved, the way a thing dissolves when the only thing holding it together was arithmetic. Priscilla Vane's firm dissolved its engagement with the Whitlock family 4 months later. I know that because I read it in a trade newsletter in a waiting room, and I felt almost nothing.
The Institute accessioned the collection formally the following April.
They put a small card on the reading room door. It says, "The Marsh Collection of Southeastern Cultivars, 1,040 plates. 100 more than when I gave it, because I kept working, and everything I've made since goes straight in." There was no ribbon. There were 11 people and a folding table with coffee on it, and Dot gave a 2-minute speech that was mostly about the humidity control system. I've thought about why the donation mattered so much to me, and it isn't generosity. I want to be honest about that. It's this. A collection that belongs to one woman can be married into, inherited, leveraged, sold in a bad year, or written into somebody's page 3. A collection that has been given away, publicly, in a recorded instrument, cannot be. It is out of reach forever. Not just out of Grant's reach, out of mine. I made the one thing I loved impossible to take. That's not a sacrifice, that's a lock. For about a year afterward, I was very angry at a version of myself I had invented, the woman who was so starved for one good question that she handed over 18 months of her life to whoever asked it. That woman is not real, and I've stopped punishing her. Because here is what actually happened. A group of well-resourced people spent 11 months and a considerable amount of money engineering an approach to me, and they were defeated in 6 hours by a woman with an ink pad and by a 71-year-old archivist who didn't ask questions. They lost because they made one assumption. They assumed that a person who spends her life on small, precise things would not read a 12-page document carefully. They confused patience with passivity. Almost everyone does. I have known women my whole life who are treated as decorative because they are quiet, who are talked over in meetings, who get their sentences finished for them, who are handed things to sign. And I want to say something directly to any of you watching who recognize yourselves in that. Your carefulness is not a weakness they're tolerating. It is the thing they did not budget for. I still have the pen. People are surprised by that. They expect that I threw it into the harbor, or sold it, or put it in a drawer to never look at again. But it's a very good pen. The nib is ground exactly the way I like it, fine enough for annotation, and I have never found another one that suits my hand as well. I use it every single working day. I used it this morning. There's my name down the barrel in that fine serif, and I have to tilt it toward the lamp to read it, and every time I do, I think the same thing. He was right. It was for signing the most important thing I'd ever sign. He just never asked what. If this story reached something in you, if you've ever been handed a piece of paper by someone who assumed you wouldn't read it, I'd like to hear about it. Write to me at vellumoflife.gmail.com or tell me in the comments where in the world you're watching from tonight. Every name, every city, every detail can be changed. Your story is safe here. Thank you for staying with me. Until the next chapter.